So my talk today is going to be on Expo for web, kind of Expo. Uh, so my name's Evan Bacon. I'm an open source developer. I work full time on Expo, and Expo is a universal platform for building React applications that run on iOS, Android, and web. And essentially, you can take whatever React component you have and then run that workflow. Conceptually, this works like pretty well, but I think like to explain it better, I just like to show it. So what I've got here is just like a project that I just set up, and I can run like Expo start iOS, Android, and web. And then what it's going to do here is it's going to start up the Metro bundler, which is Facebook's bundler for starting up a React Native project. And then it's going to open it up in the iOS simulator, the Android emulator, and then in the browser. When it finishes booting up. And let's see, this booting taking longer than I had expected. So while we wait for that to boot up, I kind of wanted to show you guys some projects that people build using Expo. This is like really cool. This is a project that someone had just shared the other day. This is using the Expo camera to essentially pick an element out using augmented reality and then paste it onto an image. So it's like a AR copy paste. I think this is like pretty cool because it was just kind of like a random app in the ecosystem, and it wasn't really like this is cool for a React Native app, but it's just cool for like any app. And then another thing that someone had built recently was this shop app from the Shopify team, which uses Expo GL to create this like spinning globe effect, which I thought was pretty neat. So essentially the way Expo works is by providing a few core things. The first being this Expo client. Now, what the Expo client is an iOS and an Android React runtime. You can think of like the web browser as a web React runtime. And so you can download this iOS and Android client and run your bundle while it's in production, which just like drastically speeds up your building process. And another thing that we provide is the Expo CLI, which is a really great way for running your project and building it natively in the cloud and then shipping it to the App Store and Play Store. It's like one of the best ways to go about doing that. But what's really cool about this is this eject command that we just recently rebuilt. If anyone has used Expo in the past, the eject command was kind of is pretty tricky to use because it would kind of make it very difficult to add native code. So you can think of like the client as if it's like a browser, it would have something like navigator.geolocation, and then you could access like the geolocation of the device. But if there's any native functionality that you need to add that's not there, you essentially need to eject the native code and then add native code and rebuild it onto your device. If you're an Electron developer, this is similar to like rebuilding Chromium, but with new features in it. So with eject working really well, we can go from like this kind of standard project that has all the native code involved, the iOS and Android folder, and like some JavaScript. And just to render hello world before, it was a little over half a gig with all the node modules installed. But now, because the eject command works so well, you can just start with a very minimal project. So it would just have one component in app.js that's just exporting one React or Expo component, and then a package JSON. We call this a managed app because it's essentially managed in the client workflow. And then at any point, if you need to add native code, you can just run Expo eject, and it will generate the iOS and Android native code. And it's the same as if you just generated a regular like React Native project. And we call this a bear workflow. And what's really cool about this new bear workflow is that you can run it in the Expo client anytime after you've ejected. So the Expo client is kind of just always something that you can use. And the only difference is that if you've added native code, like for instance, say you added Bluetooth to your project, you wouldn't be able to access that in the native client because it needs to be rebuilt into your project. Another really cool dev tool that we've added is this Create React Native app. Noticing that my window might be blocking some of this, but Create React Native app is it's a tool that we built to just initialize React Native apps really quickly because alternatives were taking like a mix. So this MPX 1 second, and you can create any kind of React Native project from it or Expo project, which is just it's a nice tool to have. So another tool that Expo provides is this thing called Snack. And you can use Snack to essentially get started building React Native apps right now from the browser. So you can go to snack.expo.io, and it has like all of the tools necessary to create iOS, Android, and web apps. And then you can export it and run it locally or whatever you want. But it's really nice, and then there's like no commitment involved. You don't need to install Xcode or Android Studio or Node. You can just get right to using it. And the last thing that Expo adds is the Expo SDK. Now, if we look at an app like Twitter, for instance, if we wanted to build this, we would use some basic primitives like image and texts and lists. But there's a lot of other functionality that's required to make a production ready app. There's things like the blur view or video or navigation. And so Expo provides all of these things in a universal capacity. It's all written in TypeScript and well tested. But then when you use Expo, we also make it so that when you do things like image and text and list, those will run on both iOS, Android, and web by doing like some kind of bundler magic to alias the like React Native packages to React Native web packages. In the future, it would be cool if those were all like merged into like one consecutive package for like each platform. But I want to talk to you guys a little bit more today about React navigation. Now, this is a library that we maintain at Expo with help from the community. It's really popular. About 2 out of every 3 React Native projects has React navigation installed in it. And if you're coming from a web background, navigation is pretty analogous to like how you develop an application. It's mostly referred to as routing. And you can do things like file system-based routing. Frameworks like Next.js or Gatsby have it like built right in. But navigation in a native app is a lot more difficult. There's like a whole set of view systems involved and kind of a lot of like native back and forth and animations to get things right. So it was really tricky to get this right on native, but then to add web support was like another layer of difficulty kind of on top of that. So we've got some beta web support here that I'm going to show you. A lot of this work's been done by my colleague Satya, who's a full-time Expo contractor. So this might look a little underwhelming if you're like a web developer, but using this like universal abstraction, we can essentially, we've got like links now. So everything has these like hover links, and you can like click and drag the link. So you get all that native built in. Before it was just like a button. And then you can also do things like scaling up and down the screen. So right here, I'm just like this is like a appearance mode using like React Native appearance. So you can easily integrate light mode and dark mode into your application. But something React navigation provides is this like view layer and on top of the router layer. So you get all these like view systems, which are really important to building a native application. One of these is the drawer view. So what I've got right here is an iOS PWA built with Expo. And you'll notice that it has like the full screen notch up at the top. And so what's really cool about Expo packages like React navigation is that because it's accounting for native, it is automatically going to be adjusting for that safe area when you're running it as a PWA. So you don't need to do anything special, and it will like make sure that content isn't being like cut off. And I'm using like tap gestures and stuff here as well. And then here I'm scaling up and down the viewport to show off the new like kind of drawer system. I've actually got a lot of this stuff. I can just demo it. I had all these videos, in case anything went wrong because streaming. So right over here, I've got the demo for it. I'll just pull it over here. And this is all running at React Navigation example.netlify.app if you want to try it yourself right now. And this is basically like a continuously deployed version of the example in the React Navigation repo. So over here, I can turn on and off the dark theme. If I scale this in, you'll see that the drawer collapses in, and I can open the drawer and close it. And if I pull it out, then we've got this new permanent drawer mode, which is really like screen like longer and shorter. So it's really nice for universal applications. Over here, we got this really cool bottoms tab. And essentially this like you can click between these tabs and you'll notice that the URL bar up here is changing. But what's really great is down here, you'll see the icon is like next to the text. And if you were to do something like pull it in, then it will like the icon will float above the text. So it works really great with media queries, and you don't really need to do anything extra. You get a lot of this functionality right out of the box. If we look at like this material tops tabs, where we're clicking between these two, but it's now fully integrated with the history API. So you can do things like going back and forward, and it will like do the animation between pages here. And then I can just, click around and I've got like the URL bar changes. So a lot of this is like really, it's pretty cool to be able to do it like one time and then have it work in iOS, Android, and web in a very intuitive way. So I'm gonna go back over here. I've got like some little demos of what it looks like on the iOS PWA, which I think is pretty cool because just having really nice PWA integration makes it, it's really just easier to work with, I think, in a lot of ways. And then another thing that we do at Expo a lot is we dog food our tools internally. So we use them to build all of our own apps. And something that we found is like a really important use case just to have documented and like really well built out is the authentication flow. So here's what authentication looks like on this new React Navigation web. You can click on the username and password, type those in. It will prompt you to save the password kind of automatically, and then it'll take you to this like an authenticated screen. So all that's like built in and documented. So it's very easy to add to your app. But we wanted to take it like one step further. So this is something that I actually just released maybe like 2 weeks ago. This is universal login for Expo. It's really, it's pretty cool. I get really excited about this. So with this, you can, in this demo, I've got 12 different providers that I'm authenticating with. And then everything is done using React hooks. It's very, very hip, very fresh. So we got this use auth request, and then we've got a kind of a client configuration and all of our different like endpoints. And then over here, it's running in an iOS app. And when it pulls open the screen, this is a secure web system for authenticating. It's like a native view for a pop-up. And it can share cookies between sessions. So it's very easy to like re-authenticate. And then here's what all that looks like using the exact same code running in the browser. So it's utilizing the window.popup API to open a window which is similar to that native window. And then again, using like 100% all the same code, I'm able to sign into 12 different providers, all like on the same page very, very easily, which is super cool. And at this point, I'm just like rambling so I can get through like the whole video. But I yeah, I'm a huge fan of this API. It's just made like building apps super easy. But something that's like really important that I found was like even more important than just having a really nice API was having everything really well documented and having like a bunch of guides built out for everything. So if you go to the Expo docs, I've got guides for every single one of these providers and how you would integrate it into your universal application. So it's very easy. You can copy and paste and you get like API references to how all these like providers work. And it's just like super nice to use. So I want to talk very specifically about Expo for web. This is something that I work on full time. And it's like something that we've been building out a lot since the last year. I actually talked about Expo for web when I started like working on the project at React Europe last year. And something that was interesting that I found this last year was there's when you have this like React Native abstraction, you start to lose some of this like very web specific functionality. And an example of this web specific functionality is stuff like routing or SEO or accessibility. Because in the browser, you've got things where it's like scraping and indexing your page. You've got the screen reader looking at different elements on the page. And you've got routing, which is it's very much integrated with the URL bar, which there's not like a analogous like app from web to native. So if you consider like building an actual blog page with React Native for web, you're going to maybe do something like this, where you've got like your title with a text element, your content with view elements and text elements, and then maybe your footer element. But if you render this directly, what you're going to get is just like div soup. There's going to be a bunch of divs everywhere. Everything will render out to a different style div. And then scrapers can't really do a lot with this, and accessibility, it can't really make much out of this. But if you were to do this on the web, you would use a bunch of different HTML elements. You would use things like the H1, the main, the footer, and then accessibility, like screen readers are able to look at this and know exactly what's going on. So to combat this, I created this library called Expo HTML elements, where you can import, a capitalized version of the HTML element, and then on web, it will render out to an actual H1 if you were to use the H1 element. And then on iOS and Android, it would just create a styled UI label and text view. So if there is no like parity feature for the native platform, it will just like omit adding any like accessibility values or something like that. I've got like a little example of kind of how this works here. And I built this out last night, where you can kind of see I built this over here using text, and everything renders out to a div. And then over here, I built this one using H1. It renders to H1, main to main, P to a div. So we still use div for some text elements. The reason for that is because the way that native styling works with kind of like the child element and the parent element with text, if you want to get that inheritance right, you kind of need to use divs and then like a React context provider. So there's a lot going on into the scene, like behind the scenes, to get all that right. But all of the like main things like footer, those all like get mapped to things that are very good for screen readers to see. And then especially like with the anchor element, or the A, uh, you see here, I've got an actual A rendering, so I can do things like click and drag the link. I get like all kind of native link functionality, like I can copy the link address. Before, what you would do is you would have a text element with like an on press handler, and if I click that, it will still link me away, but I can't like click and drag it, and I don't get any of like the native link things, whereas I do if I render an actual anchor element. So this has just made developing React Native for web like a lot more powerful and easy to do, especially if you're coming from a web background, because you can use this in native and it would work exactly as you would expect it to. All right. So I wanted to talk also a little bit about progressive web apps. Now, progressive web apps are really exciting in Expo, because if you're building your website with Expo and your native app with Expo, then we can make a really good estimation about like what your progressive web app should look like. So something that's like really new is we've got also like all these new automatic icons that get generated when you actually build your PWA, and a lot of them get cached between sessions, so you don't have to worry about like adding a lot of overtime to your rebuilds. But it will, like, if you don't define a favicon, it will generate a favicon from your app icon. And then if you don't have like native PWA app icons, it will use your existing app icon and your existing splash screen. What this looks like on iOS is this is a PWA with Expo Web that I built. And you see it opens up from the icon to the splash screen and then goes into the very basic application. But all I had to do here was define what I wanted my native app icon and my native splash screen to look like, and it did all the rest for me. So if I was to compare this to the same native app built with Expo, what I've got here is the same like app icon, the same splash screen, the same title. So from like this whole home screen experience, all this automatically looks identical across web and native, which I think is super exciting. And I built all of these icons using this little icon builder tool that I made with Expo Web. It's pretty fun. You can like pick between different like little Twitter emojis and then select a color. And it also has dark mode. It's very important. And then you can download these and drop them in your app. It's a fun little tool. I like using it. And so another thing that we've done with Expo Web is we've added a lot of integrations over the last year because there's already so many great tools for building React apps, things like Next.js and Gatsby and Storybook especially. And these tools, we didn't want it to be a thing where you had to choose between Expo and some other tool because a lot of these tools work really nicely and a lot of people's stacks already depend on them. So there's integration guides for all of these different frameworks and platforms, tools, things like Preact and Electron, Gatsby, and it's very easy to integrate all of these into your existing application and to use them for the web part of your Expo app. If any of them support native, like for instance, Storybook supports native, then you can use it universally across iOS, Android, web. But then things like Next.js, you can just use for your Expo web project. So I'm gonna actually go back and see if I got this thing started up really quickly. And I'm gonna try starting this project up right here. So this is an Electron setup that I have going right here. It doesn't work all too well when I'm on a Zoom call, but we'll see if it like starts up right now. So this is just a basic Expo app. What I have right here is a simple component, and this component is rendering a gradient with a text element inside of it. And so here's the Electron version of my Expo web app that I've opened up right here. So this will run on Mac, Windows, Linux, and I can make some changes and save those changes, and it will update over here accordingly. So I'll add like white, red, blue, and all that, and then we get like these Electron changes running. Let me see if I can get it working on native too while I'm at it. So this is going to essentially fire up the Metro bundler, and then it's going to try to like set up some packager middleware as well. All right, so the Metro bundler started up. So I could click, or I could open my Expo client and I could scan this code if I wanted. I've got my simulator opened up over here, so I'm just gonna hit like the I key, which will attempt to open it in the Expo client on the iOS simulator, which we've got running right there. Gonna give it a quick reload. Metro can sometimes have problems connecting, but there we go. Now we've got the iOS thing connected. I'm gonna hit the W key, which will start up a Webpack bundler, and then it will open that in the web browser. While we're waiting for that to open up, I think we can also try opening up the Android emulator. I'm just gonna keep opening up different devices until my computer eventually comes to a halt. So now we've got it running on web, we've got it running on iOS, we've got it running on the desktop. Let's see if we can do Android as well. I'm pretty 50-50 about if this will like stop my computer. Okay, gonna give that a reload really quickly. Android, be quick. And there we go. Okay, so we got Android, web, iOS, and Electron, and I'll make some updates to it. Really cool. Let me see if I can find a nice way to arrange these on the screen so you can kind of see them all update. So I'll update like one of the colors, change it to green. You'll see iOS, Android, and then Electron and web updating all right here from the exact same React code all at the same time, which is just super exciting. And this isn't limited to these basic components. For instance, I could also import like the auth session thing that I showed you earlier and have authentication running across all of these. But my luck so far is like, I don't want to push it any further. So I'm gonna just leave it at that. We can open up all these devices and run it, and it works really nicely. Some other demos I have are, let's see, I got this Expogram demo essentially, which is like an Instagram clone that I built with Expo. I can open up like the camera, and then I've got this camera running in the browser. The same thing works as a desktop app. You see over here, I get prompted to add it as a PWA. all of this happens automatically. I don't have to do anything special, and I can install it to my desktop. I can do things like slide between these, and then right here I get like this like blur view running on top of the camera, and I've got like audio information coming in. And so a lot of these like things that I think a lot of people aren't even aware that you can do in the browser, you just kind of get them when you build your native app and then run it in the browser. So it's really exciting stuff. This, you know, like you make an image with some text like React Europe, and then I can save that text. And yeah, here we go. Let me save this, and then it will like save it image to my desktop. Essentially, if you were running this on native, what it would do is it would save it as an image to your photo gallery. So this is like the closest that you would get with web to saving it to your downloads, which is still like pretty cool. All right. And really quickly, I just want to talk about what we plan on building next, and that'll be it. I might be running out of time here. So something that I'm planning on working on next is having fast refresh work across iOS, Android, and web. So as you may have saw in that demo just now, iOS and Android both updated first before web and Electron. And that is because web and Electron are just using hot module reloading. Well, I mean, it's still pretty cool, but like it could be even better if we integrated fast refresh universally across all of the platforms. So what that would give you is stateful updates. So your state is preserved while the changes occur. And this should be like pretty straightforward to add. The Vercel team who are working on Next.js actually just added fast refresh to Next. So it's definitely like they've done a lot of like the heavy lifting so far. So, you know, good job to them. And that is all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to let me know, let the organizers know. If you want to follow the project anymore, you can follow Expo on Twitter. I'm at Baconbricks on Twitter if you want these like crazy screenshots and ramblings. But yeah, that's it.
Let's see, talking about Expo, is it still the case that Expo bound to a particular React Native version, which makes us have to wait on any new errors we spot on React Native to be fixed on both native side and Expo side? I tried to fill in words that weren't there. Sorry.
Yeah, I got it. So Expo, when you're running in the managed workflow, that has set native packages, which are updated once quarterly. But when you eject to bare and you build whatever native code you want into it, then you can like change whichever native packages you want. I think it's like trickier to change some of the native, like the core React Native bits, but it is still very possible. And you can always just like start with a React Native project that you initialize with like create React Native app, and then install Expo modules on top of that. And then you can use like whichever React Native version you want.
Right. Next one. Any plans on having Expo support Android TV and tvOS?
No immediate plans. No, there's a lot of things to do like right now, and there's a lot of like platforms that I think like web, for instance, and maybe like Catalyst would be another cool platform to support, which is like the Mac's new way to share on desktop and iOS.
Okay, cool. And I also sourced a few other questions. Is there a recommended way to do code splitting? Is the code splitting supported, or do you have to eject and find some workaround?
So code splitting happens at the Metro level, which is the bundler that Facebook has split out of React Native. And so any code splitting that you would do in like another React Native project, you could do with Expo. What we've done recently is we used to have this big monolithic package, just Expo, and you would import all the modules from that. But we've since split it up, so you now would do like yarn add Expo camera, and so it's a lot more split up just by default. And your bundle size, like your JS bundle size, is now much smaller. And then on web, it has really good tree shaking, and it will pull out a lot of the modules you're not using, and it's doing all that with Webpack.
Okay. Next one, is it possible to use a web-specific module and target other platforms using a fallback?
Yeah, so you can create platform-specific extensions. So if I had like app.ts and then I had app.web.ts, when I'm building my web app, it will like target that app.web.ts file instead of the .ts. And so, for instance, that emoji like icon builder that I showed you, that's
Yep.
using like React, like favicon or something, and like React like color picker, and those are just web only, and it still works like really well as a web app, but then it won't work as a native app.
So building off of that a little bit, I need only Android and iOS parts in my project. Can I completely remove the web bits despite changing the platforms in the app JSON? Metro Bundler persistently brings up the web part.
Yeah, so the platforms section in the app.json is actually like optional now. If you want to remove the web parts, you can absolutely do that. You can uninstall React Native Web and React DOM, and then it just, there will be no web code used. But when you build your native app with Metro, it's going to ignore all of the web specific code regardless of what you do.
Okay. Do we have time for more questions, Patrick?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay, cool.
So
shoot.
We are porting the React Europe app to Expo Web, and we are just waiting for the pull request about QR code scanner to be merged. Do you know when this is going to happen?
Yeah, I can work on it later today, I guess.
Oh wow.
It's like still trying to figure out a nice way to do web workers and like a nice standard for workers, because it starts up a web worker in another process, and then that does all the QR code scanning on top of Expo Camera. So it works if you were to actually just like clone the branch that I have from the pull request, but it doesn't work in a nice standard way yet.
So web workers in general are not supported by React Native Web officially. That's what you're saying, or?
Yeah,
are they supported? Yeah. Okay. And
okay.
how about yeah?
Go ahead.
And
sorry.
How about stuff such as WebRTC? I guess that's a little. So it's a lot of code for React Native, I guess. Do you plan to support it?
Supporting WebRTC, I think now that we've got like, we're working on stuff with turbo modules where you can do like array buffers, and you can send things like directly between native and the JavaScript process with the JavaScript interface. I think it'll be a lot easier to do things with media. Before, when you were going back and forth over the bridge, it wasn't like a great use case. But now it's definitely like a lot more possible.
Cool.
If you want to do server-side rendering in Expo Web, what is the recommended way to do that? Is the easiest way to use Next.js?
Yeah, I would highly recommend you use Next.js with Expo for Web if you want to do SSR. There's a great like adapter that I built for it, so you can install Expo/Next adapter. I've got a bunch of guides out for it, and I even just like opened an example in the Next.js repo so that you can do like with Expo and pull down the Expo Next example.
Cool. And if we have another minute, I got two more. When I make in Expo Web, when I make new views and connect them with React navigation, we notice that the title in the web remains static. Also the description. How can we change this metadata dynamically as we navigate? That might be a tough one.
Yeah, I think that was something that just wasn't supported. React navigation for web is still like in beta, but I think just added that document.title change maybe like 2 or 3 days ago. So
okay.
It's like upstream on the main branch.
So this question might already be outdated?
Possibly.
Or
Maybe, yeah,
it can still be answered though.
While I'm doing this.
One more. In development, I'm getting content security policy issues because my data is coming from Apollo via Hasura. It appears Expo Web forces HTTPS. How can I disable it for testing purposes?
Yeah, so as of I think 2 days ago, we turned that off. So it will be HTTP by default, and then if you want to add or use HTTPs, you just do Expo start -- HTTPs, and to turn it off, you do like no HTTPs. But by default now it's off.
Great. And the final, very short question: how did you come up with the name Bacon Bricks?
So I used to be, well, still kind of am like a
Hey
Lego
everyone,
master
thank you so much
builder.
for having me here.
And
Nice.
So when I was
Already got
13,
it.
I was like, oh man, it's cool. Bricks. And my name is Bacon. And
There you go.
B.
All right. Thank you very much, Evan, for coming and doing the